As you read last week, Beauty Beyond Bones was recently ranked as the #3 best eating disorder recovery blog of 2019 by Healthline, one of the top health information providers. So, in the spirit of that recognition, I thought it would be timely to debunk some of the most common myths about eating disorders. Here's the thing about eating disorders, they are so misunderstood. They are so often the butt end of insensitive jokes, and there are deep-seated stereotypes that cast this shadow of shame over the sufferers, myself included. And all of this misinformation and harmful preconceived notions surrounding them makes it truly difficult to offer meaningful and productive support. So, let's just dive in, shall we, and debunk some of the most common myths about eating disorders. All right, myth number 1, it is a rich white girl disease. Let's face it, when people envision in their mind a person suffering from an eating disorder, it's always a teenaged, pretty, affluent white girl with crippling perfectionism and an acclivity towards self-absorption, which, let's be real, yeah, that's definitely a large population of eating disorder sufferers, but not all. Eating disorders don't see race, gender, economic status, nationality, creed. It is a mental illness whose impact spans all backgrounds and communities. And from personal experience, I can tell you that at the inpatient treatment facility where I spent 3 months, there were all different types of women there, from different backgrounds, countries, socioeconomic statuses. There were women who came in heavily addicted to drugs. There were people whose families had to refinance their homes to be able to afford inpatient treatment. There were all different ethnicities present. Were the majority of women from financially comfortable Caucasian families? Yes, but not all. Next myth, it's a diet gone wrong. This mindset about eating disorders is so harmful because it makes it seem as though it's just a phase or just a brush off episode of teen angst, when the reality is that it's never about a diet at all. The diet is merely a manifestation of the internal brokenness that is the source of the eating disorder. Next myth, she can just snap out of it because ultimately it's a choice. Like the previous myth, this mentality that she is choosing this lifestyle choice and that she needs to just snap out of it, this is by far the most destructive and most distorted mindset about eating disorders. They say that an eating disorder is not about the food and it's not about the weight. And from an outsider's perspective, that seems the most illogical and most counterintuitive, but it is precisely the situation. As much as her loved ones want to just snap her out of it, believing that her destructive behavior and harmful actions are a choice she's making, the reality is that those behaviors and actions are merely symptoms and manifestations of what's going on inside. Deep inside, she believes to her core the lie that is influencing these destructive behaviors. The lie is different for everyone, but it always falls in the vein of not being good enough, being a burden, being unloved, not being worthy of love, being worthless. And to her deepest core, she believes it. It's this demonic tape that plays over and over and over, berating her morning and night. It's the first thing she thinks of when she wakes up and the last thing that taunts her to sleep. And sadly, try as you might, no doctor, no parent, no friend, no therapist or priest can just snap her out of it. The only person who can do that is her. She has got to silence the lie. She has got to renounce that lie and muffle its incessant clamoring. And the only true source of breaking free and silencing that lie is Jesus. Next myth, she's obsessed with her looks and vain. And I'm going to tell you something that may surprise you. Eating disorders, though they seem from the outside to be the result of extreme self-absorption, quickly and severely switches to the perverse opposite. Allow me to share some of my own personal history with this one. During my anorexia, I was so ashamed of my body. I hated it. I thought that my emaciated, skeletal, 78-pound frame matched the interior darkness and ugliness of my black soul, and I felt I deserved to be so hideous. Again, tying into the lie. And all I wanted to do was hide my body. So that's why when you see girls with anorexia hiding under layers of baggy clothes, yes, because they're always cold, but mainly because they want to disappear into the background and hide away their shame that they are literally embodying. Next, only girls can get eating disorders, and this is absolutely a myth. Though most ED sufferers are women, roughly 10% of all sufferers are male, and that number is on the rise recently. With hyper-focus on Instagram and dramatic diets, hello, keto, men and boys are also vulnerable to body dysmorphia and eating disorders. Next, body positivity is necessary for recovering. This is an unpopular opinion, but I am not on the body positivity train. There are some camps of people in recovery that preach the body positivity Bible, but I am not one. Mainly because when I was truly recovering and weight restoring, loving my body wasn't even on my radar. I still hated my body. And in order to fully recover, I had to see myself as more than a body. I was a soul in a body. I had to see the divine purpose of my body as the temple of the Holy Spirit. My body became my act of worship. I didn't recover because all of a sudden I woke up one day and decided to love my curves or love myself. No, ma'am. Next, you cannot recover without going to Inpatient, otherwise known as mini-mod. This is a camp, there's a camp of recovery warriors who adhere to mini-mod. It's an evidence-based recovery approach whose name comes from the Minnesota starvation experiment and the family-based treatment, otherwise known as the Maudsley protocol. The guidelines are simple. Eat a minimum of 3,000 calories per day. You're encouraged to eat way more. No food is off limits, no restricting, no weighing yourself, and absolutely no exercise. It has a rabid cult-like following online, and many people swear by this at-home style of treatment. And unpopular opinion alert, I have a few qualms about it. To put it simply, refeeding syndrome is a real, potentially fatal condition. To go from a state of severe starvation to putting on weight is a very delicate thing that needs to be monitored. Just think about it. The malnourished girl's heart is so compromised because as a muscle, the starving body has been using its own muscles as fuel to keep the girl alive. So the deteriorated heart is doing everything it can just to stay alive. So to just all of a sudden overload it with this massive influx of calories could send it into cardiac arrest and be fatal. So there is a strategic method to trickling in initially the calories. This is why at Inpatient, I had to sleep at the nurse's station for the first 2 weeks and get my vitals monitored around the clock to make sure I wasn't entering refeeding syndrome. So to attempt to navigate that scary water without proper medical supervision, that's a no from me, dog. Secondly, I don't like the mini-mod method because it puts parents in the role of food police. It's not the parent's job to be the bad cop in regards to food, as counterintuitive as that seems. But ultimately, it creates this nearly irreconcilable relationship around food. And during the recovery process, yes, parents should be there to love and support their child through it, but not being the food police. I mean, that is the job of the nurses at an inpatient facility. Because real talk, eating disorders cause girls to be sneaky, manipulative, and deceptive. And they all have tricks to make it look like they ate or cleaned their plate or what have you. I mean, the stories I could tell from Inpatient. But being food police, that is the territory for a stern nurse that will draw a hard and firm line. Not a parent that is frankly easily manipulated by their daughter. And lastly, with how entrenched I was in my disease, I simply would not have been able to adhere to the 3,000 calorie guidelines, nor would I have been able to branch off of my safe foods. And let's face it, you can't reach the calorie goal with diet yogurt and dry oatmeal. Okay, this is getting lengthy, so time for some rapid fire. All right, athletes can't get eating disorders. That is absolutely false. In fact, at Inpatient, I was with a professional swimmer, a former professional figure skater, and there were 2 gymnasts in the program as well. Sports are so hyper-focused on body mass and size in general, and they are frankly breeding grounds for eating disorders, especially when it comes to exercise addiction. Next, starving yourself is the only real eating disorder. Nope. Anorexia nervosa is what most people commonly think of in terms of eating disorders, but there's also bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder, orthorexia, other specified feeding or eating disorders, and compulsive exercise. And for more in-depth information on those, you can visit NADA, and I will link that below. Next, you have to have a feeding tube in order to recover, and that is a big no. Though many do, not all choose to, and I, for one, did not use a feeding tube. Next, you have to be emaciated to have an eating disorder. Again, definitely not. Eating disorders come in all shapes and sizes. Next, once your weight restored, you're healed. And this one is really, really important. In my humble, non-medical doctor, non-therapist, non-dietitian opinion, once your weight restored, your true recovery has only just begun. And dare I say it, the mental recovery from an eating disorder is much harder than the physical. And that's coming from someone who had over 30 pounds to gain. Because in order to truly recover, you've got to silence that lie. You've got to silence it and replace it with the truth, or else it will just manifest itself in other ways again and again and again. If not in eating disorder relapse, then in your relationship with others, or your relationship with alcohol, or codependency, or you name it. I mean, just like the eating disorder isn't about the weight, neither is the recovery. Yes, it is necessary to be weight restored, but the internal restoration is equally, if not more, vital for healing. And to that end, recovery is a way of life for the rest of your life. You will always have to choose to listen to the truth and silence the lie every damn day. Next, if you relapse, you've failed. This might be an unpopular opinion, and let me preface again by repeating my non-medical, non-therapist, non-dietitian place in this world and say that recovery is a long and winding road. It is truly a journey, and for many, if not most, myself included, relapse is part of that process. There will be days, perhaps even seasons, where the lie can slip in here and there, and perhaps even regain control. But the important thing is to use everything good and bad as an opportunity for growth, and to wake up every morning and to rededicate your life to living in the freedom of recovery. Next, you can't be vegan and truly recovered. This one is tricky because you have to look and see where the motivation is coming from. If she's vegan because it's just another way to exercise her eating disorder in a socially acceptable way, then absolutely not. You've got to root that demon out by the gonads. But yes, it is possible to be truly recovered and vegan, but you've got to really examine the motives and stay diligent in your recovery. Okay. Eating disorders are caused by insensitive parents. Last but certainly not least, this myth is false, false, false. So if you're a parent and reading this and you're feeling like you're out of options, out of hope, and carrying around this crippling guilt of what could I have done differently, I want to just pause and give you a hug and tell you to just let that go. Truly, take a deep breath and let it go, because just like you can't snap her out of it, you didn't snap her into it either. Eating disorders are influenced by a number of different, both biological and environmental factors, like having eating disorders run in families, or family history of mental illness or other food-related diseases, like in my case, ulcerative colitis, where it physically hurt to eat at times. But other risk factors that influence the development of an eating disorder are things like perfectionism, bullying or abuse, depression, and even still there are societal pressures through advertisements, social media, magazine covers, or just this conventional beauty standards. I mean, all of those things influence the development. Yes, father hunger is a real and very strong commonality among many sufferers of eating disorders, but insensitive parenting does not cause an eating disorder. So there you have it. I hope that this may have been helpful or illuminating. Eating disorders are about so much more than the number on a scale or the food on a plate. And the sooner we realize that, the sooner we can offer compassion, love, and effective support to those who need it most. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you over on Beauty Beyond Bones. Bye-bye.